The elevator doors slid open to reveal empty hallways that should never be empty at this hour. Jonathan Mitchell's heart hammered against his chest as he stepped onto the 42nd floor of Mitchell Industries, his polished dress shoes echoing against the marble floor with each hurried step. The silence felt wrong, dangerous even. His 6-year-old daughter Sophie was supposed to be in the supervised playroom down the hall, safely tucked away with her nanny while he finished the quarterly reports that couldn't wait until morning. But the playroom was empty. The small pink backpack still sat on the child-sized table, next to scattered crayons and a half-finished drawing of what looked like a birthday cake. Sophie's favorite stuffed elephant lay abandoned on the carpet, its button eyes staring accusingly at Jonathan as if asking where he'd been when his daughter needed him most. The nanny was nowhere to be found, and the security guard who was supposed to check on them every hour had apparently vanished too. Jonathan's hands shook as he pulled out his phone, scrolling through the building's security app. The cameras showed nothing unusual in the main corridors, but there were blind spots throughout the massive building. Places where a curious little girl could wander and get lost, or worse, where someone with bad intentions could take her without being seen. His mind raced through every horrible possibility he'd read about in the news, every parent's worst nightmare that he'd always thought would never happen to him. The building felt different at night, transformed from the bustling center of his business empire into something cold and threatening. Shadows stretched across the hallways like grasping fingers, and every small sound made him jump. The soft hum of the air conditioning system seemed louder now, almost ominous, as if the building itself was keeping secrets from him. He rushed from floor to floor, calling Sophie's name until his voice grew hoarse. The executive offices were locked and dark. The conference rooms sat empty, their long tables reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights like still water. Even the usually comforting smell of fresh coffee from the break rooms couldn't calm his growing panic. How could a 6-year-old simply disappear from a building with this much security? The security office was his next stop, but the monitors showed nothing helpful. Just empty corridors and the occasional janitor pushing a cart through the lower floors. The night security guard, an older man named Pete, looked as confused as Jonathan felt. They reviewed the footage together, watching Sophie's last known location in the playroom at 9:30 p.m. After that, nothing. "Sir, we'll find her," Pete assured him, but Jonathan could hear the uncertainty in the man's voice. Maybe she's just playing hide and seek somewhere. Kids do that, you know. But Sophie wasn't the type to wander off. She was responsible for her age, maybe too responsible after losing her mother 2 years ago. She knew the rules about staying where she was supposed to be, especially in Daddy's big building. The fact that she was missing meant something was seriously wrong, and Jonathan felt the weight of every parenting mistake he'd made crushing down on his shoulders. As they expanded their search to include every floor, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about how he'd failed her. He'd been so focused on the reports, so determined to close the biggest deal of his career, that he'd barely looked up when she'd brought him her drawing earlier. She'd been trying to tell him something about tomorrow being special, but he'd just smiled and patted her head, promising to look at it properly later. Now later might never come. The thought of calling the police terrified him almost as much as not calling them. Once he made that call, this would become real in a way that felt impossible to accept. His little girl, the only good thing left in his world after losing his wife, could actually be gone. The media would descend like vultures, turning his private nightmare into public entertainment. His business rivals would whisper about how he couldn't even keep track of his own child, let alone run a multi-billion-dollar company. But none of that mattered if Sophie was in danger. He was reaching for his phone to make the call when he heard a faint sound drifting up from somewhere below. Laughter. A child's laughter, bright and carefree, echoing through the ventilation system. It was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard, and it was definitely Sophie. The sound seemed to be coming from the direction of the company cafeteria on the 15th floor. Jonathan sprinted toward the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time, his expensive suit jacket flapping behind him like wings. His heart was still racing, but now it was with hope instead of fear. She was alive, she was laughing, and whatever had happened they could figure it out together. As he got closer to the 15th floor, the sounds became clearer. Sophie's voice, animated and excited, mixing with someone else's, a woman's voice, patient and kind. They were talking about something that involved a lot of measuring and mixing, punctuated by the occasional giggle from his daughter. Jonathan slowed his pace as he approached the cafeteria doors, suddenly curious about what could possibly be happening at this hour that would make his daughter so happy. The doors were propped open and warm light spilled out into the hallway along with the most incredible smell, vanilla, butter, and something else that reminded him of his own childhood birthdays. He peered around the corner and felt his breath catch in his throat. Sophie stood on a step stool at one of the large prep stations, her small hands dusted with flour, beaming up at a beautiful woman in chef's whites. The woman had rich dark skin and gentle eyes, and she was patiently guiding Sophie through what looked like the process of making a cake from scratch. Mixing bowls of various sizes covered the counter, along with ingredients that must have come from the cafeteria's professional kitchen. The woman he assumed she must be part of the night shift kitchen staff was treating his daughter like she was the most important person in the world. She listened intently to Sophie's chatter, laughed at her jokes, and offered gentle corrections when the little girl's measuring got a bit enthusiastic. Jonathan found himself frozen in the doorway, torn between relief and fascination. Sophie was safe, happier than he'd seen her in months, and completely absorbed in what she was doing. The panic that had consumed him for the past hour slowly faded, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. When was the last time he'd seen his daughter this engaged, this joyful? More importantly, when was the last time he'd been the one to put that expression on her face? Jonathan pressed himself against the wall outside the cafeteria, his heart still hammering but now for entirely different reasons. Through the open doorway, he could see Sophie's animated face as she stirred something in a large mixing bowl, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way it always did when she was focused on something important. "Now we add the vanilla," the chef was saying, her voice warm and encouraging. "But just a little bit. Vanilla's like a good friend. You want enough to know it's there, but not so much that it takes over the whole conversation." Sophie giggled at this, a sound that hit Jonathan square in the chest. When had he last heard her laugh like that? Lately, their interactions had been limited to hurried breakfasts and bedtime stories interrupted by phone calls. Even their weekends were filled with business dinners where Sophie had to sit quietly and behave like a little adult. "Can I crack the eggs?" Sophie asked, bouncing slightly on her step stool. "Of course you can, sweetie. But let me show you the secret first." The chef, he could see her name tag read Bella, demonstrated the proper technique with practiced ease. "Tap it firm but gentle, like you're knocking on someone's door when you don't want to wake the baby." Jonathan found himself leaning closer, genuinely curious about this woman who had somehow wandered into his daughter's life at exactly the right moment. Bella moved around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who'd spent years perfecting her craft, but there was something more than professional skill in the way she interacted with Sophie. She had the natural patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed children, not just tolerated them. "My daddy used to help me crack eggs when I was your age," Bella continued, guiding Sophie's small hands. "He said the most important ingredient in any recipe isn't written down anywhere, it's the love you put into it." "Do you think my daddy will like the cake?" Sophie asked, her voice suddenly smaller, more uncertain. Jonathan's breath caught. "A cake for him? Is that what this was about?" "Oh honey, any daddy would be over the moon to get a cake made by his little girl," Bella assured her, and Jonathan could hear the sincerity in her voice. "Especially when it's made with this much care. Tell me, what's the special occasion?" "It's his birthday tomorrow," Sophie said, carefully separating eggshells from the bowl. "But he's been really busy lately and I wanted to surprise him with something special. The nanny was supposed to help me but she fell asleep, and I knew the kitchen was down here because Daddy showed me once." Jonathan closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of pride and guilt wash over him. His birthday. He'd completely forgotten about his own birthday, too caught up in quarterly reports and board meetings to remember. But Sophie had remembered, and she'd been planning something special while he'd been too distracted to notice. "Well, you picked the perfect thing," Bella said, measuring flour with practiced precision. "There's nothing quite like a homemade cake to show someone how much you care about them. And I can tell you care about your daddy very much." "He works really hard," Sophie explained, her small voice carrying a wisdom that seemed too old for her years. "Sometimes I think he forgets to be happy. Mommy used to make him laugh all the time, but she went to heaven and now he's sad a lot." Jonathan felt his throat tighten. He'd thought he'd been hiding his grief from Sophie, protecting her from his own struggles with losing the love of his life. But children saw everything, didn't they? She'd been watching him carry the weight of single parenthood and a demanding career, and instead of asking for more attention, she decided to give him a gift. "I'm sorry about your mommy, sweetheart," Bella said gently, her hands never pausing in their work. "Losing someone we love is the hardest thing in the world. But you know what I think? I think your mommy would be really proud of what you're doing right now. And I think your daddy is going to remember this birthday for the rest of his life." "Do you really think so?" Sophie asked, hope bright in her voice. "I know so," Bella replied firmly. "Now let's make this the most amazing cake your daddy has ever seen." "What's his favorite flavor?" "Chocolate," Sophie said immediately. He pretends to like the healthy stuff, but I've seen him sneak chocolate bars from the kitchen drawer when he thinks I'm not looking." Bella laughed, a rich sound that seemed to fill the entire kitchen. "A man after my own heart. Chocolate it is. And since it's such a special cake, we're going to make it from scratch, no boxes, no shortcuts. Just pure, delicious, made with love chocolate cake." Jonathan watched as they worked together, Sophie hanging on Bella's every word as she explained the science behind baking. How the cocoa powder would bloom when they added hot coffee to it, making the chocolate flavor deeper and richer. How the eggs would help everything stick together while the butter made it tender. She spoke to Sophie like she was a fellow chef, not just a child playing in the kitchen. "The most important thing about baking," Bella explained as she helped Sophie measure the cocoa powder, "is that it's really about taking care of people. Every cake, every cookie, every loaf of bread, it's a way of saying, 'I love you,' without using words." "Is that why you became a chef?" Sophie asked. "Part of it," Bella admitted. "I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen. She taught me that food is love made visible. When someone's having a bad day, you make them soup. When they're celebrating, you make them cake. When they're far from home, you make them the foods that remind them they're loved." Jonathan found himself thinking about his own childhood, about birthday cakes that came from his mother's hands instead of expensive bakeries. When had he stopped appreciating those simple gestures? When had everything in his life become about efficiency and profit margins instead of love and connection? "Your grandmother sounds wonderful," Sophie said wistfully. "She was," Bella agreed. "She used to say that the secret to a happy life was making sure the people you love never went to bed hungry, not just for food, but for kindness and attention and care." As they worked, Jonathan noticed details he'd missed in his initial relief at finding Sophie safe. Bella had set up the workspace perfectly for a child, with everything at the right height and within easy reach. She'd found a small apron somewhere and tied it around Sophie's waist to protect her clothes. She anticipated Sophie's questions before they were asked and had endless patience for the inevitable spills and mistakes. This wasn't someone just doing a job or going through the motions. This was someone who genuinely cared about making a little girl's dream come true, even though they'd never met before tonight. The mixer whirred to life, combining all their carefully measured ingredients into what was already starting to smell like the most incredible cake Jonathan had ever encountered. Sophie watched in fascination as the batter came together, and Bella explained each step with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a treasured secret. Jonathan realized he could watch this scene for hours, his daughter happy and engaged, learning something new from someone who clearly had a gift for teaching. But more than that, he was seeing a side of Sophie he'd somehow missed in their day-to-day routine. She was curious, thoughtful, and surprisingly capable when given the chance to try new things. How many other opportunities had he missed because he was too busy or too worried about keeping her safe to let her explore and grow? The mixing bowl scraped against the counter as Bella folded the chocolate batter with long, practiced strokes. Sophie stood mesmerized, watching the dark mixture become smooth and glossy under the chef's expert hands. Jonathan remained hidden in the hallway, equally captivated by the scene unfolding before him. "Now comes my favorite part," Bella announced, reaching for a small bottle from the spice rack. "The secret ingredient that my grandmother passed down to me, and her grandmother passed down to her." "What is it?" Sophie asked, practically bouncing with excitement. Bella held up the small bottle with ceremonial importance. "Pure almond extract. Just 3 drops, no more, no less. It doesn't make the cake taste like almonds, but it makes the chocolate taste more like chocolate than chocolate has any right to taste." "That doesn't make sense," Sophie giggled. "The best secrets rarely do," Bella replied with a wink. "But trust me on this one. My great-great-grandmother discovered this when she was baking for the mayor's wife back in 1924. She accidentally knocked over the almond extract bottle, and just a tiny bit fell into her chocolate cake batter. She was so worried she'd ruined everything, but when the cake came out of the oven, it was the most incredible thing anyone had ever tasted." Sophie's eyes grew wide. "Did she get in trouble?" "Just the opposite. The mayor's wife asked her to cater every party in town after that. She became so famous for her chocolate cakes that people would travel from 3 towns over just to try a slice." Bella carefully counted out 3 drops into the batter. "And now you know the family secret." Jonathan watched his daughter's face light up with the importance of being trusted with something so special. When was the last time he'd shared something meaningful with her like this? His work stories were all about board meetings and profit margins, nothing that would capture a 6-year-old's imagination or make her feel like she was part of something bigger than herself. "Can I tell Daddy about the secret ingredient?" Sophie asked as Bella began pouring the batter into prepared cake pans. "Of course you can, sweetie. Secrets are only fun when you get to share them with people you love. Bella smoothed the batter with an offset spatula, creating perfectly level surfaces. Besides, he's going to want to know how his cake got to be so special. As they slid the pans into the large commercial oven, Sophie peppered Bella with questions about her family, her grandmother, and how she'd learned to be such an amazing chef. Jonathan found himself leaning closer to hear the answers, genuinely curious about this woman who had appeared in their lives like some sort of guardian angel. "I went to culinary school in Atlanta," Bella explained as she set the timer. "But really, everything important I learned in my grandmother's kitchen. She taught me that cooking isn't just about following recipes, it's about understanding how ingredients work together, how they make each other better." "Like friends?" Sophie asked. "Exactly like friends. Some ingredients are bold and want to be the star of the show, like chocolate or vanilla. Others are quiet supporters, like the almond extract we just used. They make everything around them shine brighter." Bella began cleaning up their workspace with efficient movements. "And some ingredients, like salt and desserts, seem like they don't belong at all, but they're actually the most important ones because they help all the other flavors stand out." Jonathan found himself thinking about his own life, about the people who played different roles. His business associates were certainly the bold ingredients, always demanding attention and recognition. But who were his quiet supporters? Who helped him shine brighter without asking for credit? Looking at Sophie now, flour in her hair and chocolate on her cheek, he realized she'd been his almond extract all along, the secret ingredient that made everything in his life better, even when he was too distracted to notice. "While the cake bakes, we can make the frosting," Bella announced. "What do you think, chocolate frosting to match, or should we do something different?" "Different," Sophie said immediately. "Daddy likes it when things surprise him. At least he used to." There was something wistful in that last comment that made Jonathan's chest tighten. When had he stopped appreciating surprises? When had his life become so scheduled and predictable that even his 6-year-old daughter noticed? "Then we'll make cream cheese frosting with a hint of vanilla," Bella decided. "It'll be sweet but not too sweet, and it'll make the chocolate cake taste even more special." As they worked on the frosting, Bella continued sharing stories from her childhood. She told Sophie about learning to separate eggs without breaking the yolks, about the first time she'd successfully made pie crust, about the disasters that had taught her more than the successes ever could. "The key to being a good cook," Bella said as she demonstrated the proper way to cream butter and cream cheese, "is not being afraid to make mistakes. Every burnt cookie teaches you something about your oven. Every fallen cake teaches you something about timing. Every oversalted soup teaches you about balance." "What if you make a mistake on something really important?" Sophie asked, her voice small. Jonathan wondered if she was thinking about more than just baking. Was she worried about making mistakes with this cake, or was this about something deeper? "Then you learn the most important lesson of all," Bella replied gently. "You learn that most mistakes can be fixed, and the ones that can't be fixed usually aren't as terrible as they seemed at first. Sometimes mistakes turn into the best things that ever happened to us." She paused in her mixing to look directly at Sophie. "You know what I think? I think you're exactly the right person to be making this cake for your daddy. Not because you won't make any mistakes, but because you care enough to try something new and difficult just to make him happy." Sophie beamed at this praise, standing a little taller on her step stool. Jonathan felt a surge of pride in his daughter, mixed with shame that he'd apparently been too busy to notice how thoughtful and caring she was becoming. The timer chimed and they pulled the cake layers from the oven. Even from his hiding spot in the hallway, Jonathan could smell the incredible aroma that filled the kitchen. Rich, chocolatey, with just a hint of something mysterious that must be the secret almond extract. "Perfect," Bella pronounced, testing the center of each layer with a toothpick. "Your daddy is going to be so surprised when he tastes this." "Do you think he'll really like it?" Sophie asked, suddenly shy again. "Honey, he's going to love it," Bella assured her. "But more than that, he's going to love that you made it for him. The most important ingredient in any recipe isn't something you can buy at the store, it's the love and thought that goes into making it." As they waited for the cakes to cool before frosting, Bella taught Sophie how to properly wash and dry mixing bowls, explaining that taking care of tools was just as important as knowing how to use them. She showed her how to organize ingredients so nothing got forgotten, and how to read a recipe all the way through before starting. But mostly she just listened. She listened to Sophie's stories about school, about her friends, about the book she was reading about a girl who wanted to be a scientist. She asked thoughtful questions and responded with genuine interest, treating Sophie's thoughts and opinions as if they mattered deeply. Jonathan realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd listened to his daughter with this kind of focused attention. Their conversations were usually rushed affairs between other obligations, with him half listening while checking his phone or thinking about work problems. When had he stopped seeing Sophie as a whole person with her own thoughts and dreams, instead of just another responsibility to manage? As if reading his thoughts, Sophie asked Bella, "Do you think grown-ups forget how to have fun?" Bella paused in her cleaning, considering the question seriously. "I think sometimes grown-ups get so worried about taking care of everything that they forget to enjoy anything. They're so busy making sure everyone is safe and fed and warm that they don't notice how beautiful the sunset is, or how good cookies smell when they're baking, or how nice it feels when someone they love hugs them tight." "That sounds sad," Sophie observed. "It is sad," Bella agreed. "But you know what's wonderful? Children like you remind grown-ups how to notice the good things again. Every time you get excited about something, every time you ask a question they haven't thought about, every time you do something sweet like make a birthday cake, you're helping them remember what's really important." Jonathan felt tears prick his eyes. This woman, this stranger who had found his daughter wandering the halls and turned the experience into something magical, understood something about parenthood that he'd somehow lost sight of. Sophie wasn't just his responsibility. She was his teacher. The cake layers sat cooling on wire racks while Bella put the finishing touches on the cream cheese frosting. Sophie had grown quieter as the evening progressed, and Jonathan could see something weighing on his daughter's mind as she absently traced patterns in the flour dust on the counter. "Bella?" Sophie's voice was small, uncertain. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course, sweetie. You can tell me anything." Bella set down her mixing spoon and gave Sophie her full attention, the kind of focused listening that had become rare in Jonathan's busy world. "I'm worried about Daddy." The words tumbled out in a rush as if Sophie had been holding them back for a long time. "He doesn't smile as much as he used to, and sometimes I hear him talking on the phone really late at night when he thinks I'm sleeping. He sounds scared, and Daddy's never scared of anything." Jonathan's heart clenched. His late-night calls to lawyers and accountants, his whispered conversations about hostile takeovers and board challenges, he'd thought he'd been protecting Sophie from all of that. But children heard everything, didn't they? They picked up on stress and worry even when adults tried to hide it. "What kinds of things is he scared about?" Bella asked gently, never stopping her work on the frosting but giving Sophie her complete emotional attention. "I think maybe his work is in trouble," Sophie confided. "He keeps getting calls from people who sound angry, and he has to go to lots of meetings where everyone argues. Last week, I heard him tell someone that he might lose everything he worked for." The accuracy of her observation hit Jonathan like a physical blow. The company was facing its biggest challenge in 15 years, a competitor trying to force a merger that would essentially be a hostile takeover. He'd been working 18-hour days trying to find a solution, barely sleeping, surviving on coffee and determination. He'd thought he was being a good father by shielding Sophie from the crisis, but instead he just made her worry about things she didn't understand. "And you thought making him a birthday cake might help?" Bella asked, understanding dawning in her voice. Sophie nodded, suddenly looking much younger than her 6 years. "Mommy used to say that the best way to help someone feel better was to show them how much you love them. And Daddy loves chocolate cake, even though he pretends he doesn't because he thinks he should eat healthy food." "Your mommy sounds like she was a very wise woman," Bella said softly. "She was." Sophie's voice got even smaller. "She knew how to make Daddy laugh even when he was worried about work stuff. She used to dance with him in the kitchen while dinner was cooking, and she'd put music on really loud and make me join in. Daddy would pretend to be embarrassed, but I could tell he loved it." Jonathan closed his eyes, remembering those moments with painful clarity. Lisa had indeed known how to pull him out of his own head, how to remind him that there was more to life than quarterly earnings and board meetings. She'd made their house feel like a home, not just the place where he slept between work sessions. "After she got sick, everything changed," Sophie continued. "Daddy tried to keep doing the fun things, but I could tell his heart wasn't in it anymore. And now he works all the time, and I think he's forgotten how to be happy." "So you decided to remind him," Bella said, and there was something almost reverent in her tone. "By making him the most special birthday cake you could manage." "I wanted to surprise him with something that would make him remember the good times," Sophie explained. "But I didn't know how to make a cake, and the nanny was supposed to help me, but she fell asleep. I remembered Daddy showing me the kitchen once when we were here late, so I came down here to see if maybe there were instructions or something." "And instead you found me," Bella finished with a smile. "Are you glad I found you?" Sophie asked, suddenly worried. "I know I'm not supposed to be in the kitchen without permission, and you were probably trying to work and I interrupted everything." "Oh, honey," Bella interrupted, crouching down so she was at Sophie's eye level. "Finding you has been the best part of my whole week. Do you know what I was doing when you wandered in here? Sophie shook her head. I was feeling sorry for myself, Bella admitted. I was working the night shift again, missing my family, wondering if I was wasting my talents making sandwiches for office workers who eat lunch at their desks without even tasting the food. I was thinking about giving up on my dream of opening my own restaurant someday and just accepting that this was as good as my life was going to get. Jonathan found himself leaning forward, drawn into this unexpected confession from a woman he'd never met but who was somehow becoming important to both him and his daughter. But then this brave little girl walked into my kitchen, Bella continued, with flour in her hair and determination in her eyes, ready to take on the challenge of making a cake from scratch just to show her daddy how much she loves him. And suddenly I remembered why I became a chef in the first place. Why? Sophie asked, hanging on every word. Because food is love, and love is the most important thing in the world. Your daddy might be scared about his work problems, but he doesn't have to worry about the most important thing. He has a daughter who loves him enough to sneak out of her playroom and find a way to make his birthday special. Sophie beamed at this, standing a little taller. Do you really think it will help? I know it will help, Bella said firmly. Because when someone is feeling lost and scared, the thing that saves them isn't more work or more worry, it's being reminded that they're loved. And this cake isn't just going to taste amazing, it's going to taste like love and effort and a little girl who thinks her daddy is worth staying up past bedtime for. Jonathan felt his throat close up entirely. When had he last felt worthy of that kind of devotion? When had he last stopped worrying about profit margins long enough to appreciate the incredible gift he'd been given in Sophie? Now, Bella announced, straightening up and checking the cake layers, I think these are cool enough to frost. Are you ready to make the most beautiful birthday cake your daddy has ever seen? Sophie nodded eagerly, her brief moment of vulnerability giving way to renewed excitement. As they began the delicate process of assembling and frosting the cake, Jonathan watched his daughter work with a focus and precision that reminded him painfully of himself. But where his intensity came from stress and pressure, hers came from pure love and the desire to create something beautiful. Bella guided Sophie through each step: how to spread a thin crumb coat first, then chill the cake before adding the final layer of frosting. How to use an offset spatula to create smooth sides and perfect swirls on top. How to clean up drips and make everything look professional. The secret to beautiful frosting, Bella explained as she helped Sophie navigate the spatula around the cake's edges, is patience. You can't rush it or force it. You have to let it flow naturally and just guide it where you want it to go. Like people? Sophie asked with startling insight. Exactly like people, Bella confirmed. The harder you try to control something, the more likely it is to fall apart. But if you're gentle and patient and trust the process, beautiful things happen. As they worked, Jonathan found himself thinking about his own approach to life since Lisa's death. He'd been trying to control everything: Sophie's schedule, his company's future, even his own grief. He'd been gripping so tightly to the things he thought he could manage that he'd forgotten to appreciate the things that were already perfect. Like his daughter's laughter echoing through a quiet kitchen at midnight. Like a stranger's kindness to a lost little girl. Like the love that had motivated Sophie to attempt something far beyond her abilities, just to make him smile. The finished cake was a masterpiece: 3 layers of rich chocolate cake with smooth cream cheese frosting, decorated with simple but elegant swirls that looked almost professional. Sophie had insisted on writing "Happy Birthday, Daddy" in chocolate ganache across the top, her careful letters slightly wobbly but unmistakably made with love. It's perfect, Bella declared, and Jonathan had to agree. He'd eaten cakes from the most expensive bakeries in the city, but none of them had ever looked more beautiful than this one, made by his 6-year-old daughter's determined hands. Do you think Daddy will cry when he sees it? Sophie asked, suddenly worried. If he does, it'll be happy tears, Bella assured her. Sometimes when something is so beautiful and special, our hearts get so full that they overflow a little bit. That's what happy tears are: hearts that are too full to hold all the love inside. Jonathan was already there, tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter carefully place candles around the edge of the cake. He'd never seen anything more beautiful in his life, not because of the cake itself, but because of everything it represented: his daughter's love, a stranger's kindness, and his own wake-up call about what really mattered. Tomorrow was his birthday, but tonight Sophie had given him a gift more valuable than anything money could buy. She'd reminded him how to see the world through eyes of love instead of fear. And somehow, a woman named Bella had helped make it all possible. As the clock on the cafeteria wall ticked past midnight, Sophie stepped back to admire their creation with the satisfaction of an artist completing a masterpiece. The 3-layer chocolate cake stood proudly on its glass pedestal, the cream cheese frosting smooth and pristine under the bright kitchen lights. 12 small candles formed a perfect circle around the edge, and Sophie's carefully piped, "Happy Birthday, Daddy," decorated the center in elegant chocolate script. "I can't believe we actually did it," Sophie whispered, her voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. "It looks like something from a real bakery." "It is from a real bakery," Bella replied with a grin, gesturing around the commercial kitchen. "And more importantly, it's made by a real pastry chef." She pointed at Sophie with mock seriousness. "That's you, by the way. After tonight, you officially know more about cake making than most adults." Jonathan watched from his hiding spot as his daughter practically glowed with pride. The transformation in Sophie over the past few hours had been remarkable. She'd started the evening as a lost little girl with a big dream, and now she stood confidently beside her creation, flour streaking her clothes and chocolate under her fingernails, looking like she could take on the world. "Can we put it in a special box?" Sophie asked, suddenly practical. "I want to make sure it stays perfect until Daddy's birthday tomorrow." "I have just the thing," Bella said, disappearing into the storage room. She returned with a pristine white bakery box, large enough to hold the cake with room to spare. "This is what we use for our most special orders. Your cake definitely qualifies." As they carefully transferred the cake into the box, Bella continued sharing little tips and tricks. How to lift a cake without damaging the frosting. How to secure the box so nothing would shift during transport. How to store it overnight to keep the layers moist and the frosting stable. "You know," Bella said as she tied the box with a professional-looking ribbon, "I've been working in kitchens for 8 years, and I've never enjoyed making a cake more than I enjoyed making this one with you." "Really?" Sophie asked, her eyes shining. "Really? Usually when I'm baking, I'm thinking about timers and temperatures and whether I remembered to order enough ingredients for tomorrow's lunch service. But tonight I got to remember why I fell in love with baking in the first place." Bella knelt down to Sophie's level again. "You reminded me that every cake tells a story, and the best stories are about love." Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest. This woman had spent her entire evening helping a stranger's child, asking for nothing in return, and somehow managing to make it sound like Sophie had done her the favor. When was the last time he'd encountered that kind of genuine generosity? "I wish I could invite you to Daddy's birthday party," Sophie said wistfully. "But I don't think he's having a party. He doesn't do parties anymore since Mommy went to heaven." "That's okay, sweetie," Bella replied gently. "The most important part of any birthday party is the birthday boy and the people who love him. You and your daddy having cake together is going to be the perfect party. But what if he's too busy with work to notice?" Sophie's voice carried a worry that was far too mature for her age. "Sometimes he gets so focused on his computer that he forgets to eat lunch." Jonathan winced. How many meals had he skipped while Sophie watched? How many times had he chosen emails over conversation, spreadsheets over story time? "Oh honey," Bella said, her voice full of understanding, "I think your daddy is going to notice this cake. But more than that, I think he's going to notice you. Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Sophie shook her head. "I see a girl who loves her daddy so much that she was willing to leave her safe playroom and explore a big scary building just to find a way to make him smile. I see someone who wasn't afraid to ask a stranger for help when she needed it. I see a young lady who spent her whole evening learning new skills and working hard, just to create something beautiful for someone else." Bella smoothed a stray curl away from Sophie's face. "Any daddy would be proud to have a daughter like you." "Do you really think so?" Sophie asked, leaning into the gentle touch. "I know so," Bella said firmly. "And I think your mommy would be proud too. You've got her heart always thinking about how to take care of the people you love." Jonathan had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. Lisa would indeed be proud of Sophie, but would she be proud of him? Had he been the father Lisa would have wanted him to be, or had he let grief and work consume him until he'd forgotten how to see the incredible person his daughter was becoming? "Bella?" Sophie asked quietly. "Do you think Daddy misses Mommy too much to be happy again?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Jonathan held his breath waiting for the answer. It was the question he'd been asking himself for 2 years, the fear that kept him awake at night and drove him to work longer hours if he stayed busy enough. Maybe he wouldn't have to confront the emptiness Lisa had left behind. Bella was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "I think your daddy misses your mommy very much," she said finally. "And I think that's exactly what he should do. When you love someone that much, missing them when they're gone is just proof of how special they were. But missing someone doesn't mean you can't be happy again," she continued. "It just means your happiness looks different than it did before. Your daddy's happiness might be quieter now, or it might come in smaller moments instead of big celebrations. But I promise you, Sophie, watching you grow up and become the amazing person you're becoming that makes your daddy happy, even when he's too worried or tired to show it." "How do you know?" Sophie asked. "Because I can see it in the way he raised you," Bella replied. "You're kind and thoughtful and brave. You care about other people's feelings. You work hard even when things are difficult. Those aren't things that happen by accident, they're things that happen when someone loves you enough to teach you how to be a good person." Jonathan felt tears streaming down his face again. This woman, this stranger, could see things about his relationship with Sophie that he'd been too close to recognize. Yes, he'd been distracted and overworked, but somehow he had managed to raise a daughter who was turning out to be remarkable. "Now," Bella said, standing up and checking the clock, "I think it's time to get you back upstairs before your daddy starts to worry. He's probably wondering where you disappeared to." Sophie nodded, suddenly looking tired. The adrenaline of the evening was wearing off, and Jonathan could see that she was fighting to keep her eyes open. She'd been running on determination and excitement, but now that the cake was finished, exhaustion was setting in. "Can you help me carry it?" Sophie asked, looking at the large bakery box with some concern. "Of course I can," Bella replied. "But first, let me write something on the box for your daddy." She pulled out a marker and wrote an elegant script across the top. "Made with love by Sophie, with assistance from her friend Bella. Happy birthday, Mr. Mitchell. You have an extraordinary daughter." Jonathan's breath caught. She knew who he was. Somehow, during their evening together, Sophie had mentioned his name, and Bella had put the pieces together. She knew she'd been helping the daughter of the CEO, the man who ultimately signed her paychecks, and she'd never once changed her behavior or tried to curry favor. She'd simply continued being the kind, generous person she was naturally. As they prepared to leave the kitchen, Bella made sure everything was clean and put away. She turned off the ovens, wiped down the counters, and stored the leftover ingredients properly. Even after hours of baking, she maintained the professionalism that had obviously served her well in her career. "Will I see you again?" Sophie asked as they headed toward the elevator, Bella carrying the precious cake box. "I work here every night," Bella replied. "So if you're ever here late with your daddy again, maybe you can come say hello. And who knows? Maybe next time we can make cookies." "I'd like that," Sophie said sleepily, leaning against Bella's side as they waited for the elevator. Jonathan quickly retreated to his office, his mind racing. In a few minutes, Bella would return Sophie to the playroom, and he'd have to pretend he'd just discovered she was missing. He'd have to act surprised and relieved, when really he'd witnessed the most beautiful evening of his daughter's life unfold in real time. But more than that, he'd witnessed something that had changed him fundamentally. He'd seen his daughter through the eyes of someone who recognized her worth, someone who had taken the time to truly listen to her and understand her heart. He'd seen what it looked like when an adult treated Sophie as a whole person deserving of respect and attention, not just a child to be managed and protected. And he'd seen himself through Sophie's eyes, a father she loved deeply but worried about constantly, someone who had lost his way but still had time to find it again. The elevator doors opened, and Jonathan heard Bella's gentle voice encouraging Sophie to stay awake just a little longer. In a few minutes, this magical evening would be over, and Sophie would be back in her playroom with her cake, waiting for morning to surprise him. But Jonathan knew the real surprise was his. Tomorrow, when Sophie presented him with her masterpiece, he wouldn't just be receiving a birthday cake. He'd be receiving a wake-up call, a reminder of what really mattered, and a second chance to be the father his extraordinary daughter deserved. Thanks to a woman named Bella, who had turned a potential disaster into the most meaningful night of their lives. Jonathan's office felt different in the early morning light. The same mahogany desk, the same leather chairs, the same wall of windows overlooking the city, but everything had changed after what he'd witnessed the night before. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying every moment of Sophie's adventure in the kitchen, every word of wisdom from the chef who had turned a crisis into a miracle. He'd arrived at the office early, partly because he couldn't sleep and partly because he needed to make sure everything was in place for Sophie's surprise. The security guard, Pete, had helped him retrieve Sophie and the cake box from the playroom where Bella had left them, both sleeping peacefully on the small couch. Sophie had clutched the bakery box even in her sleep, unwilling to let go of her precious creation. Now the cake sat in the small refrigerator in his office, and Sophie was napping on his office couch, having insisted on coming to work with him despite her late night. She'd been too excited about the surprise to stay home with the nanny, and Jonathan found he didn't want to be separated from her anyway. The morning sun streamed through his windows, highlighting the changes he'd already begun making. 3 separate contracts that had demanded his immediate attention lay signed and delegated to his team. His phone, usually buzzing with constant demands, sat silent on his desk. For the first time in 2 years, Jonathan Mitchell was going to celebrate his birthday properly. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called softly, not wanting to wake Sophie. To his surprise, it was Bella who stepped through the doorway, looking professional in her chef's whites and carrying a small wrapped package. She glanced around the impressive office, taking in the expensive artwork and panoramic city views, but her expression remained warm and unintimidated. "Ms. Rodriguez," Jonathan said, standing and extending his hand. "I was hoping I'd have a chance to speak with you today." "Mr. Mitchell," she replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to deliver this before my shift ended." She held up the small package. "And I wanted to make sure Sophie was okay after her late-night adventure." Jonathan glanced at his sleeping daughter, curled up under his suit jacket on the leather couch. "She's perfect. Thanks to you." "She's a remarkable little girl," Bella said, her voice full of genuine affection. "You should be very proud." "I am," Jonathan replied, and was surprised to realize how completely he meant it. "More than I've probably shown her lately." Bella studied his face carefully, and Jonathan had the distinct impression she was seeing more than he was comfortable revealing. This woman had a gift for reading people, for understanding what lay beneath the surface. "She loves you very much," Bella said simply. "Everything she did last night, the courage it took to find help, the determination to learn something completely new, the hours of careful work, it all came from wanting to make you happy." "I know," Jonathan admitted. "And I've been so focused on work problems that I almost missed it entirely." "But you didn't miss it," Bella pointed out. "You're here now, on your birthday, choosing to spend time with her instead of in meetings. That's what matters." Jonathan looked at her curiously. There was something different about her this morning, a professionalism that hadn't been present in the relaxed kitchen atmosphere. She seemed to be maintaining some distance, and he wondered if she was regretting the intimacy of the previous evening. "Ms. Rodriguez," he began carefully, "I want you to know how grateful I am for what you did last night. Sophie could have gotten hurt wandering around the building alone, but instead she found someone who turned the experience into something magical." "Please call me Bella," she said with a small smile. "And you don't need to thank me. Spending time with Sophie was a gift. She reminded me why I love what I do. Even so, I'd like to do something to show my appreciation." Jonathan moved toward his desk, reaching for his checkbook. "Perhaps a bonus or—" "Mr. Mitchell," Bella interrupted gently but firmly, "I didn't help Sophie because I expected payment. I helped her because she needed help, and because making that cake with her was one of the most wonderful evenings I've had in years." Jonathan paused, his hand hovering over the checkbook. In his world, everything had a price, every favor came with expectations. But Bella's sincerity was unmistakable. She genuinely didn't want anything in return for her kindness. "Then how can I thank you properly?" he asked. "You can eat every bite of that cake and tell Sophie it's the most delicious thing you've ever tasted," Bella replied with a grin. "Because it will be true. That little girl put her whole heart into making it perfect for you." "I have no doubt," Jonathan said, feeling his throat tighten again. "But surely there's something I can do for you. Your kindness deserves recognition." Bella hesitated, glancing around his impressive office again. "Actually," she said slowly, "there is something. But it's not what you're thinking." "What is it?" "I've been working nights in the cafeteria for 2 years, making sandwiches and reheating frozen meals for the security staff and cleaning crews," Bella explained. "It pays the bills, but it's not exactly challenging for someone who went to culinary school and dreams of opening her own restaurant someday." Jonathan leaned forward, interested. "Go on." "Last night, working with Sophie, remembering why I became a chef in the first place, it made me realize I've been selling myself short. I've been playing it safe instead of taking risks." Bella squared her shoulders, meeting his eyes directly. "I'd like to request a transfer to the day shift executive dining room. I know there's an opening for a sous chef position, and I think I'm ready for the challenge." "Consider it done," Jonathan said immediately. "Just like that." Bella looked surprised. "Don't you want to see my resume? Talk to my current supervisor? Test my skills?" "I've seen your skills," Jonathan replied. "More importantly, I've seen your character. Anyone who would spend their entire evening helping a lost child, who treats that child with such respect and kindness, who asks for opportunity instead of money, that's someone I want on my team." Bella's smile lit up her entire face. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. You won't regret this." "I know I won't." And please call me Jonathan. He paused, then added, actually, there's something else I'd like to discuss with you. Before he could continue, Sophie stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up slowly, looking around the office in confusion before her gaze landed on Bella. Bella? Sophie exclaimed, suddenly fully awake. You're here. Good morning, sweetie, Bella replied warmly. I brought you something. She held out the small wrapped package. Sophie scrambled off the couch and hurried over, accepting the gift with reverent hands. Inside was a child-sized apron, white with colorful cupcakes printed all over it, and Chef Sophie, embroidered across the chest in bright blue thread. It's beautiful. Sophie breathed, holding it up against herself. Look, Daddy. I'm a real chef now. You certainly are, Jonathan agreed, his voice thick with emotion. The most dedicated chef I've ever seen. I made this for you too, Daddy, Sophie announced, pulling him toward the refrigerator. But you have to close your eyes first. Jonathan obediently closed his eyes while Sophie carefully removed the cake from the refrigerator and placed it on his desk. When he opened them, he was struck anew by the beauty of what his daughter had created. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the cafeteria, it had looked impressive. In the warm morning light of his office, it looked like pure love made visible. Happy birthday, Daddy, Sophie said softly, suddenly shy. I know it's not as good as the ones from the fancy bakery, but I made it myself. Well, Bella helped, but I did most of the work. Jonathan knelt down to Sophie's level, taking her small hands in his. Sophie, this is the most beautiful cake I have ever seen in my entire life. And you want to know why? Sophie nodded eagerly. Because every time I look at it, I'm going to remember how much my daughter loves me. I'm going to remember that she cared enough to learn something new and difficult, just to make me smile. I'm going to remember that when I was so busy worrying about work that I forgot what was really important, my little girl reminded me. Do you like the secret ingredient? Sophie asked excitedly. Bella taught me about her great-great-grandmother's recipe with the almond extract that makes chocolate taste more like chocolate. I can't wait to taste it, Jonathan replied. But first, there's something I want to tell you. He looked up at Bella, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes. Sophie, do you remember how you were worried about Daddy being scared about work problems? Sophie nodded seriously. Well, you were right. I have been scared, and I have been working too much, and I haven't been paying enough attention to the most important thing in my life, you. Jonathan took a deep breath. But last night something wonderful happened. A very special little girl reminded me what really matters. And she had help from a very kind chef who taught her that the most important ingredient in any recipe is love. Sophie looked between her father and Bella, sensing something important was happening. So I've made some decisions, Jonathan continued. First, I'm promoting Bella to be the head chef of our executive dining room, because anyone who can teach my daughter to bake like this deserves to share her talents with more people. Bella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Head chef? But I thought you said sous chef. I changed my mind, Jonathan said with a grin. Consider it a birthday gift to myself, ensuring that I get to eat food prepared by someone with your skill and heart every day. And second, he continued, turning back to Sophie, I'm making some changes to my schedule. No more 18-hour days. No more working through weekends. No more choosing emails over story time or spreadsheets over my daughter. Really? Sophie asked, hope shining in her eyes. Really? Jonathan confirmed. Because the most successful man in the world is worthless if he's too busy to notice when his daughter is becoming extraordinary. Sophie launched herself into his arms, and Jonathan held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling her small heart beating against his chest. Over her head, he met Bella's eyes and mouthed, thank you. She smiled and mouthed back, happy birthday. As they lit the candles on Sophie's masterpiece and sang, happy birthday, in the golden morning light streaming through his office windows, Jonathan realized this was already the best birthday of his life. Not because of the cake, though it would indeed turn out to be the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted, but because his daughter had given him something more valuable than any business deal, a second chance to be the father she deserved. And it had all started with a woman named Bella, who had turned a crisis into a blessing simply by treating a lost little girl with kindness and respect. Some gifts, Jonathan reflected as he made his birthday wish, were too precious to repay. But they could be honored by passing them forward, by becoming the kind of person who deserved such grace. Starting today. 3 weeks had passed since that magical birthday morning, and Jonathan barely recognized his own life. The changes had started small, leaving the office by 6 instead of 9, having dinner with Sophie every night, reading bedtime stories without his phone buzzing urgently in his pocket. But the transformation had rippled outward, affecting everything from his business decisions to his relationship with his staff. The executive dining room had become the heart of these changes. Under Bella's leadership, what had once been a sterile corporate cafeteria serving reheated frozen meals had transformed into something that felt almost like a neighborhood restaurant. The menu changed daily based on fresh, seasonal ingredients. The aroma of herbs and spices drifted through the upper floors. Most importantly, the space buzzed with conversation and laughter as employees actually took time to enjoy their meals instead of eating at their desks. Jonathan found himself looking forward to lunch in a way he hadn't anticipated. Not just because the food was extraordinary, though Bella's roasted vegetables and herb-crusted salmon had ruined him for every other restaurant in the city, but because of the atmosphere she'd created. People lingered over their meals, colleagues from different departments actually talked to each other, and the stress that usually permeated the building seemed to dissolve the moment someone walked into Bella's domain. Today he was heading to lunch with a specific purpose beyond the incredible mushroom bisque Bella had mentioned was on the menu. Sophie's spring break was coming up, and he had an idea that had been percolating since his birthday. But first he wanted to run it past the woman who had made it all possible. The dining room was busy with the usual lunch crowd, but Jonathan spotted Bella immediately. She moved through her kitchen with the grace of a dancer, orchestrating multiple dishes while maintaining the easy conversation that had become her trademark. She caught his eye and nodded toward a quiet corner table, indicating she'd join him when she could break away. "Mr. Mitchell." The enthusiastic greeting came from Tom Brady, not the football player, but the accountant from the third floor who'd apparently become one of Bella's biggest fans. "Have you tried the butternut squash soup? It's like liquid sunshine." Jonathan smiled, remembering when lunch conversations in this building had been limited to quarterly projections and merger discussions. "I haven't, but I'll make sure to order it." "Bella's got some kind of magic touch," Tom continued, gesturing with his spoon. "My wife's been begging me to bring home her bread recipe, but Bella says the secret ingredient can't be bottled." "And what's that?" Jonathan asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Love," Tom replied without a trace of irony. "She says every dish needs to be made with love, or it's just food instead of nourishment." Jonathan thought about Sophie's birthday cake, about the way Bella had treated his daughter's ambitious project with the seriousness it deserved. Love as an ingredient wasn't just some romantic notion, it was a fundamental truth about how Bella approached everything she did. "Jonathan." Bella's warm voice drew his attention as she approached their table, wiping her hands on her apron. "Perfect timing. The bisque just finished, and I saved you the last of the rosemary bread." "You spoil me," Jonathan replied, gesturing for her to sit across from him. "Hardly. You're just easy to cook, for you actually appreciate what you're eating instead of wolfing it down while checking emails." Bella settled into the chair with a satisfied sigh. "Plus, Sophie's been giving me detailed reports on your eating habits at home. Apparently you've been practicing your scrambled egg technique." Jonathan laughed. "She's a tough critic. Yesterday she informed me that my eggs were almost as good as yours, but Daddy, you need more butter." "Smart girl. Butter is always the answer." Bella's expression grew more serious. "How is she doing? I know the transition back to normal bedtimes has been challenging." "Actually, that's part of what I wanted to talk to you about." Jonathan leaned forward, his excitement building. "Sophie's spring break is next week, and I've been thinking about your dream of opening your own restaurant." Bella's eyebrows rose. "Oh. What if I told you I had a way for you to test that dream on a smaller scale first? To see if restaurant ownership is really what you want before you risk everything on it?" "I'd say you have my attention," Bella replied carefully. Jonathan pulled out his tablet and showed her a series of photos. "This is my house in the Hamptons. It's been sitting empty since Lisa died because I haven't had the heart to go back there. But looking at these pictures with fresh eyes, I realized something: the kitchen is incredible. Professional grade everything, space for a dozen people to work comfortably, and a dining room that could seat 30. Bella studied the images, her chef's eye clearly cataloging the equipment and possibilities. "It's beautiful, Jonathan. But I'm not sure I understand what you're proposing." "A pop-up restaurant," Jonathan explained, his words coming faster as his enthusiasm built. "1 week only during Sophie's spring break. You design the menu, hire whatever staff you need, invite whoever you want. I'll cover all the costs, considerate market research for both of us. You get to experience running your own place without the financial risk, and I get to see if opening that house again brings back good memories or just painful ones." Bella was quiet for a long moment, and Jonathan worried he'd overstepped. The offer was generous to the point of being overwhelming, and he realized she might see it as charity rather than opportunity. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you do this for me?" Jonathan considered the question seriously. "Because 3 weeks ago you gave my daughter something I couldn't: your complete attention, your patience, and your belief that she was capable of creating something wonderful. You didn't just help her make a cake, Bella. You helped her believe in herself." "She already believed in herself," Bella protested. "I just provided the kitchen and the guidance." "No, it was more than that. You treated her like she mattered, like her ideas and feelings were important. You listened to her in a way that—" Jonathan paused, struggling to articulate something he was still learning about himself. "In a way that I hadn't been doing. You showed me what it looked like to really see my daughter, not just manage her schedule and worry about her safety." Bella's expression softened. "Jonathan, let me finish," he continued. "That night changed everything for me. Not just with Sophie but with how I approach my entire life. I've been so focused on controlling outcomes that I forgot to appreciate what was already perfect. Your kindness to Sophie, your passion for your craft, the way you've transformed this entire building just by caring deeply about what you do, it's all reminded me that success isn't just about profit margins." He gestured around the bustling dining room. "Look at this place. People are happier here now. They're eating better, connecting with each other, taking actual breaks instead of just refueling. You've created something that feeds more than just bodies, you're nourishing souls." "I love what I do," Bella said simply. "But I also love working here. You've given me opportunities one never expected, and the chance to cook for people who appreciate good food. I'm not sure I need more than that." Jonathan smiled. "Maybe you don't. But what if you want more? What if you discover that running your own place brings you even more joy than working for someone else? Wouldn't it be worth finding out?" "And if I fail spectacularly?" Bella asked with a wry smile. "Then you'll have learned something valuable about yourself without risking your savings or your current job," Jonathan replied. "Plus, Sophie and I will have gotten to spend a week eating the most incredible food on the East Coast, so really everyone wins." Bella laughed, the sound drawing smiles from nearby tables. "You make it sound so reasonable." "It is reasonable. It's also selfish on my part," Jonathan admitted. "I want to see what you can create when you have complete creative freedom. I want Sophie to see what it looks like when someone follows their dreams fearlessly. And honestly, I want to find out if that house can feel like a home again, or if it's time to let it go." "What does Sophie think about this plan?" Bella asked. "I haven't told her yet. I wanted to make sure you were interested first." Jonathan paused. "But I think she'd love the chance to spend a week learning from you again. She's been asking if she can visit your kitchen here, and I keep having to explain that health department regulations don't allow children in commercial kitchens." "She could be my official taste tester," Bella mused, and Jonathan could see her beginning to warm to the idea. "And maybe I could teach her some more basic techniques. Nothing too advanced, but knife skills, sauce basics, that sort of thing." "So you're considering it?" Bella was quiet for another moment, her gaze moving around the dining room she'd transformed. "What kind of restaurant were you thinking? Casual? Fine dining? Family style?" "Whatever feels right to you," Jonathan replied. "Though I'll admit, I'm partial to the kind of place where a 6-year-old would feel comfortable and welcome." "Farm-to-table casual," Bella said immediately, and Jonathan could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Fresh, seasonal ingredients, simple preparations that let the natural flavors shine. Comfortable atmosphere where families can relax and enjoy each other's company." "That sounds perfect. I'd want to invite some of my former classmates from culinary school," Bella continued, her excitement building. "People who are stuck in jobs they've outgrown, who could use a chance to show what they're really capable of. Invite whoever you want. Like I said, I'll cover the costs." Bella studied his face carefully. "This isn't charity, is it? You're not doing this because you feel sorry for me or because you think you owe me something for helping Sophie?" "This is opportunity," Jonathan replied firmly. "For both of us. You get to test your dream without the risk, and I get to learn whether generosity feels better than accumulation. Lately, I've been discovering that the things I thought were cost: time with Sophie, attention to people instead of just profits, investing in others' success, those things actually provide the highest returns." "In what currency?" Bella asked with a smile. "Happiness," Jonathan replied without hesitation. "Joy. Connection. The kind of success that doesn't disappear when the market crashes or competitors emerge." Bella extended her hand across the table. "Mr. Mitchell, you have yourself a deal. 1 week, pop-up restaurant, complete creative freedom." "Jonathan," he corrected, shaking her hand firmly. "And thank you, Bella. I have a feeling this is going to be an incredible week. As they shook hands, Jonathan felt the same sense of rightness he'd experienced watching Sophie and Bella work together in the kitchen. This wasn't just about giving Bella a chance to test her dreams, it was about creating an opportunity for all of them to discover what was possible when you approached life with generosity instead of fear. Sophie was going to be over the moon. And for the first time since Lisa's death, Jonathan found himself genuinely excited about spending time in the house where they'd been so happy together. Maybe Bella's magic ingredient, love, was exactly what that house needed to feel like home again. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Jonathan's office as he reviewed the final preparations for what Sophie had dubbed Bella's restaurant adventure. 3 days had passed since their lunch conversation, and the project had taken on a life of its own. Bella had thrown herself into the planning with the kind of passionate intensity that Jonathan recognized in himself when he was working on something he truly cared about. She'd recruited 5 of her former classmates, each bringing specialized skills that would round out the team. There was Marcus, a pastry chef whose dessert portfolio made Jonathan's mouth water just looking at the photos. Anna, a sous chef with expertise in farm-to-table sourcing who'd already connected with local farmers and fishermen in the Hamptons. Diego, whose bread-making skills were apparently legendary among their culinary school alumni. And twin sisters, Carmen and Rosa, who specialized in front-of-house operations and had turned customer service into an art form. The kitchen at the Hampton house had been thoroughly inspected and stocked with everything Bella's team might need. Jonathan had found himself genuinely excited about the logistics, remembering why he'd fallen in love with business in the first place, not for the profits, but for the satisfaction of bringing together resources and people to create something meaningful. A knock on his office door interrupted his review of the final catering equipment delivery schedule. "Come in," he called. Bella entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement mixed with nervous energy. She'd clearly been working late into the night. There were ink stains on her fingers and her usually perfect ponytail showed signs of frequent finger combing. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "But I wanted to show you the final menu and run through a few last-minute details." "You're not interrupting at all. Sophie's at her piano lesson, so we have time to talk without little ears listening in." Jonathan gestured to the folder. "Show me what you've created." Bella opened the folder with the reverence of someone unveiling a masterpiece, and Jonathan understood why. The menu wasn't just a list of dishes, it was a carefully crafted experience that told a story about connection, comfort, and the joy of sharing exceptional food with people you care about. "We're calling it The Table," Bella explained, her voice warming as she described her vision. "The idea is that every great meal happens around a table where people come together, family tables, kitchen tables, picnic tables, restaurant tables. Food is just the excuse. The real magic happens in the conversation and connection." The menu was divided into sections that reflected different types of tables and the memories associated with them. Grandmother's kitchen table featured comfort foods elevated with sophisticated techniques, her famous chocolate cake with the secret almond extract, but also things like braised short ribs with herb-crusted polenta and roasted vegetables that tasted like childhood but looked like fine dining. Sunday family table focused on dishes meant to be shared, whole roasted chicken with lemon and herbs, platters of seasonal vegetables, fresh bread that begged to be torn apart by eager hands. Date night table offered more intimate portions of elegant dishes, pan-seared duck breast, delicate seafood preparations, desserts designed for 2 people to share. "But this," Bella said, turning to a special section at the back, "this is what I'm most excited about." The page was titled Sophie's Table, and featured a children's menu that was anything but typical kid food. There were mini versions of adult dishes, simple preparations that would introduce young palates to new flavors, and interactive elements that would keep children engaged in the dining experience. "You created a whole section for Sophie?" Jonathan asked, touched by the thoughtfulness. "I created it for all the Sophies who might come," Bella replied. "Too many restaurants treat children like inconveniences, giving them processed food and expecting them to sit quietly while the adults have the real, dining experience. I want kids to feel welcome, to learn that trying new foods can be an adventure, to associate restaurants with family time instead of boredom." Jonathan studied the descriptions, noting details that showed how much attention Bella had paid to his daughter's preferences and personality. There were build-your-own options that would appeal to Sophie's love of having control over her choices, simple preparations that wouldn't overwhelm young taste buds, and even a junior chef option where children could help prepare part of their own meal. "This is incredible, Bella. The whole concept, the execution, the attention to detail, it's exactly what I hoped you'd create." Jonathan set the menu aside and looked at her directly. But there's something else I want to discuss with you. Oh. Bella's expression grew cautious, as if she was bracing for bad news. I've been thinking about what happens after this week, Jonathan began. About your future and frankly about mine. Jonathan, if you're having second thoughts about the restaurant week, I understand. It's a big investment and… No, Jonathan interrupted firmly. I'm not having second thoughts. If anything, seeing what you've created has convinced me that this week is going to be even more special than I imagined. He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the city where he'd built his empire but somehow lost sight of what mattered most. When you helped Sophie make that birthday cake, you didn't just teach her about baking. You taught her that her ideas had value, that she was capable of creating something beautiful, that taking time and care with something for someone you love is never wasted effort. She taught me those things too, Bella said softly. And that's exactly my point. Jonathan turned back to face her. You have a gift, Bella. Not just for cooking, though your culinary skills are extraordinary. You have a gift for seeing what people need and providing it, whether it's a lost little girl who needs patient guidance, or co-workers who need a place to connect over good food, or a grieving father who needs to remember why family matters more than spreadsheets. Bella remained quiet, sensing that Jonathan was building towards something important. The restaurant week is going to be wonderful, Jonathan continued, but I don't want it to end there. I want to offer you something more permanent, something that would let you use all your talents in a way that creates lasting value. What are you proposing? Bella asked, though Jonathan could see the hope beginning to kindle in her eyes. I want to back you in opening your own restaurant. Not as an employee, not as a favor, but as a business partner. Jonathan returned to his desk and pulled out another folder, this one containing financial projections and market analysis. I've had my team research the local restaurant scene, and there's definitely room for what you want to create, a place that focuses on exceptional food, genuine hospitality, and bringing people together around great meals. Bella's eyes widened as she flipped through the documents. Jonathan, this is a complete business plan. It's a starting point, he corrected. Obviously, you'd have final say on everything: location, menu, staff, design, operations. I'd be the silent partner who provides capital and business expertise, but you'd be the visionary who creates the experience. Why? Bella asked, echoing her question from their lunch conversation but with more intensity. Why would you invest this much in me? Jonathan considered how to explain something that had become clearer to him with each passing day since his birthday. Because for the past 2 years, I've been focused on protecting what I have instead of creating what could be. I've been so afraid of losing more than I already lost when Lisa died that I stopped taking the kind of risks that make life meaningful. He gestured toward the menu sheet created. But watching you work, seeing the joy you bring to something as simple as making lunch for office workers, witnessing the way you transformed my daughter's disappointment into triumph, it's reminded me that the best investments aren't in stocks or real estate. They're in people who have the vision and passion to make the world a little better. This is a huge risk for you, Bella pointed out. Restaurants fail all the time, even with experienced owners and solid financing. Everything worthwhile involves risk, Jonathan replied. But I've seen what happens when you pour your heart into something. People respond. They come back. They tell their friends. They become part of something larger than themselves. He leaned forward, his excitement building as he articulated a vision that had been forming in his mind for weeks. Imagine a restaurant that becomes a gathering place for the community, where families come to celebrate milestones, where couples have first dates and anniversary dinners, where children learn that trying new foods can be fun, where people who eat alone never feel lonely. A place where the food is just the excuse for connection, Bella murmured, echoing her earlier description of the table. Exactly. And you're the person who can create that place, because you understand that hospitality isn't just about service, it's about making people feel valued and welcome and cared for. Bella was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between the business plan and the menu sheet created. Jonathan could practically see her mind working through the possibilities and challenges, weighing her dreams against her fears. There's one condition, she said finally. Name it. Sophie gets to be our official taste tester. And when she's old enough, if she wants to learn the business side of running a restaurant, you'll teach her everything you know about making smart investments and managing finances. Jonathan laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Deal. Though I suspect she'll be more interested in learning to make your secret ingredient chocolate cake than reviewing profit margins. We'll teach her both, Bella replied with a grin. A successful restaurant needs someone who understands both the heart and the business of hospitality. She extended her hand across the desk again, But this time the handshake felt different, not just an agreement between employer and employee, but a partnership between two people who shared a vision for creating something meaningful. Partners? Jonathan asked. Partners, Bella confirmed. Though I have to warn you, I'm going to work you harder than any business deal you've ever negotiated. This restaurant is going to be perfect, or I'll know the reason why. I wouldn't expect anything less, Jonathan replied. When do we start? We already have, Bella said, gathering up her menus and plans. The restaurant week is our prototype, our chance to work out the details and see what works. By the time we open our permanent location, we'll know exactly what we're doing. As Bella left his office, her arms full of documents and her eyes bright with possibility, Jonathan felt a satisfaction that was entirely different from closing a business deal. This wasn't about acquiring something or defeating a competitor. This was about creating something new, something that would make life better for everyone it touched. Sophie was going to be thrilled. Not just about the restaurant, but about the fact that her daddy had learned the lesson she'd been trying to teach him since that midnight cake baking session. That the best things in life came from caring deeply about people, not just profits. And it had all started with a woman who had treated a lost little girl with the kindness and respect she deserved, turning what could have been a crisis into the beginning of something beautiful. Some risks, Jonathan thought as he looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, were worth taking, not because of what you might gain, but because of who you might become in the process. 6 months later, Jonathan stood in the doorway of the table, watching the controlled chaos of a successful Saturday evening service. The restaurant they'd opened in a converted brownstone on the Upper East Side bore little resemblance to the sterile corporate dining room where he'd first witnessed Bella's magic, but the warm energy was unmistakably the same. Families filled the comfortable booths, their conversations mixing with the gentle clink of silverware and the soft jazz playing in the background. Children colored on the paper tablecloths with crayons provided in small mason jars, while parents actually relaxed instead of constantly checking their phones. At the chef's counter, a young couple watched in fascination as Bella's team prepared their anniversary dinner, turning the cooking process into part of the entertainment. The success had exceeded everyone's expectations. They'd been booked solid from opening night, with a waiting list that stretched weeks into the future. Food critics had raved about the revolutionary approach to family dining, and the restaurant had been featured in 3 major magazines as an example of how hospitality could be both sophisticated and genuinely welcoming. But for Jonathan, the real measure of success was much simpler. Sophie had asked if they could eat here every night. "Daddy, look." Sophie's excited voice drew his attention to the corner table where she sat with her homework spread out, a small plate of Bella's famous chocolate cookies beside her math worksheets. This had become their routine. Jonathan would pick her up from school, they'd come to the restaurant where she'd do homework while he handled any business that couldn't wait, and then they'd have dinner together before heading home. "What am I looking at, sweetheart?" Jonathan asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I figured out the answer to number 7 all by myself." Sophie pointed proudly at a multiplication problem that had been giving her trouble. "And Bella said if I finish all my math, she'll teach me how to make the sauce for tomorrow's fish special." Jonathan smiled, remembering when his own after-school routine had involved hiding in his room to avoid his father's demands for academic perfection. Sophie approached homework with curiosity instead of anxiety, and he knew that had everything to do with the supportive environment they'd created around her learning. "That's wonderful. And what did you learn about the sauce?" "It's called beurre blanc, which is French for white butter," Sophie replied importantly. "Bella says it's really just butter and wine and shallots, but the secret is adding the butter slowly so it doesn't break. She says it's like making friends. If you rush, everything falls apart, but if you're patient, you create something beautiful." Everything with Bella came back to life lessons Jonathan had noticed. Cooking techniques became metaphors for relationships, kitchen organization reflected personal discipline, and the patience required for perfect timing taught broader lessons about not rushing toward goals without appreciating the journey. "Speaking of Bella," Jonathan said, glancing toward the kitchen where he could see her putting finishing touches on plates with her characteristic attention to detail, "I have something I want to discuss with both of you." "Is it about the new restaurant you and Bella are planning in Brooklyn?" Sophie asked without looking up from her homework. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "How do you know about Brooklyn?" "I heard you talking to Bella about it yesterday when you thought I was reading," Sophie replied matter-of-factly. "You said something about wanting to bring good food to neighborhoods that don't have fancy restaurants, and Bella got that excited look she gets when she's planning something special." Sometimes Jonathan forgot how much Sophie absorbed from the adult conversations happening around her. She'd grown more perceptive and articulate over the months, benefiting from being around adults who treated her insights as valuable rather than dismissing them as childish observations. "Well, since you already know about Brooklyn, maybe you can help me with something else," Jonathan said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Sophie's eyes went wide. "Is that what I think it is?" "That depends on what you think it is," Jonathan replied, though his nervous smile probably gave away the answer. "Are you going to ask Bella to marry you?" Sophie whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow jinx the possibility. "I'm thinking about it," Jonathan admitted. "But I wanted to ask you first. How would you feel about Bella becoming part of our family officially?" Sophie set down her pencil and turned to face him completely, her expression serious in the way that meant she was about to say something important. "Daddy, Bella's already part of our family. She knows how I like my eggs scrambled. She remembers which vegetables I actually like and which ones I'm just being polite about. She listens when I tell her about school problems, and she never makes me feel dumb for asking questions." "Those are all good things," Jonathan agreed. "But marriage is different from friendship. It means Bella would live with us and we'd be a family in every way. Are you ready for that kind of change?" Sophie was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. "Do you love her?" she asked finally. "Yes," Jonathan replied without hesitation. "I love her kindness, her passion for creating beautiful experiences for people, the way she makes both of us feel special and understood. I love how she's helped us remember how to be happy together." "And does she love you back?" That was the question that had been keeping Jonathan awake at night. He was fairly certain Bella cared for him. Their partnership had evolved into something deeper over the months, filled with shared glances and conversations that stretched late into the evening. But love was a big word, especially for two people who'd found each other through circumstances neither had planned. "I think she does," Jonathan said carefully. "But I won't know for sure until I ask her." "Then you should ask her," Sophie declared with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted that good things could happen to people who deserved them. "But Daddy?" "Yes. Make sure you tell her about the secret ingredient." Jonathan looked puzzled. "What secret ingredient?" Sophie grinned, suddenly looking much older than her 7 years. "Love, Daddy. The same secret ingredient that made my birthday cake special. Tell her that you want to add love to everything you build together, the restaurants, our family, all of it." Before Jonathan could respond, Bella appeared at their table, her chef's coat replaced by the simple black dress she wore when moving between kitchen and dining room duties. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, but a few curls had escaped to frame her face, and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek that somehow made her look even more beautiful. "How's the homework coming along?" she asked Sophie, settling into the third chair at their table. "All finished," Sophie announced, closing her math workbook with satisfaction. "And Daddy has something he wants to ask you." Jonathan shot his daughter a look that clearly said, "Not quite yet," but Sophie just grinned innocently and started packing up her school supplies. "Actually," Jonathan said, his heart beginning to race as he realized there might never be a perfect moment, "there is something I'd like to discuss with you. But maybe somewhere a little more private." Bella glanced around the busy dining room, then back at his nervous expression. "Is everything okay? You look like you're about to fire me." "Just the opposite," Jonathan replied, standing and offering her his hand. "Walk with me." They made their way to the small garden behind the restaurant, a space Bella had transformed with herb planters and string lights that created an intimate atmosphere for diners who preferred to eat outdoors. At this hour, with the dinner rush in full swing, they had the space to themselves. "Bella," Jonathan began, then stopped, realizing all his carefully planned words had deserted him. "6 months ago, you helped my daughter make a birthday cake. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," Bella replied softly. "It was one of the best nights of my life." "Mine too. Not just because Sophie surprised me, but because watching the two of you work together taught me something I'd forgotten." Jonathan took her hands in his, noting how perfectly they fit together. "I'd forgotten that the most important things in life can't be scheduled, or controlled or optimized for efficiency. They happen when you open your heart to unexpected possibilities." "Jonathan." Bella's voice was barely above a whisper. "You've given me so much," he continued, his words gaining strength as he spoke from his heart instead of his head. "You've given Sophie a role model who shows her that following your dreams isn't just possible, it's necessary. You've given me a partner who challenges me to be better while accepting me as I am. You've given both of us a reminder that success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become and who you lift up along the way." He dropped to one knee, pulling out the velvet box, and was gratified to see tears spring to Bella's eyes. Bella Rodriguez, you taught my daughter that the secret ingredient in everything worthwhile is love. Will you let me spend the rest of my life adding that ingredient to everything we build together? Will you marry me? Bella's answer came in the form of launching herself into his arms before he could even finish standing up, covering his face with kisses and whispering yes between tears of joy. From the restaurant's back window, they could see Sophie pressed against the glass, her face glowing with excitement as she watched her family officially become complete. So, Bella said when they finally broke apart, I guess this means we're going to need a bigger apartment. Actually, Jonathan replied with a grin, I was thinking we might need a bigger restaurant. I hear there's a beautiful space available in Brooklyn, perfect for a couple who want to bring exceptional food and genuine hospitality to families who deserve both. Our second location, Bella mused, already envisioning the possibilities. What should we call it? Jonathan looked through the window at Sophie, who was now giving them enthusiastic thumbs up while somehow managing to direct the attention of nearby diners to the proposal happening in the garden. How about Sophie's table? He suggested. After all, none of this would have happened without a little girl who was brave enough to wander into a kitchen and ask for help making something special for someone she loved. Perfect, Bella agreed, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him again. But we'll need to make sure the children's menu includes chocolate cake with secret almond extract. And baking lessons for any kids who want to learn, Jonathan added. And a policy that families always get the best tables, even if they're not the biggest spenders. And patient staff who understand that sometimes the most important conversations happen over dessert. As they made their way back inside, hand in hand, Jonathan reflected on how dramatically his definition of success had changed. A year ago he'd measured his worth in quarterly profits and market share. Now he measured it in Sophie's laughter, in the satisfied expressions of families sharing meals at their restaurant, in the knowledge that he and Bella were building something that would nourish both bodies and relationships for years to come. The secret ingredient, it turned out, really was love for each other, love for what they were creating, and love for all the people whose lives would be touched by the magic that happened when food was prepared and served with genuine care. Some investments, Jonathan had learned, paid dividends that couldn't be calculated in dollars but were worth infinitely more than money could buy. 1 year later, Jonathan stood in the same kitchen where this story had begun, but everything was different now. The corporate cafeteria had been transformed into a test kitchen for their restaurant empire. The table now had 3 locations, with plans for 2 more in the works. But more importantly, the man who stood watching his daughter and wife work together was fundamentally changed from the panicked father who'd searched these halls for his missing child. Sophie, now 8 years old and infinitely more confident in the kitchen, was teaching her newest cousin Bella's 6-year-old niece who was visiting from Atlanta the proper technique for cracking eggs without getting shells in the bowl. The lesson was punctuated by giggles and the kind of patient encouragement that Sophie had learned from watching Bella with countless young customers at their restaurants. Remember what Bella taught us, Sophie was saying importantly, tap it like you're knocking on someone's door when you don't want to wake the baby. But I want to wake the baby, Sophie's cousin Maria protested with the logic of a 6-year-old. Babies are fun when they're awake. It's just a saying, Sophie explained with the wisdom of someone who'd been apprenticing under a professional chef for over a year. The important thing is to be gentle but confident. Like this. Jonathan watched his daughter demonstrate the technique with the kind of focused precision that reminded him of himself at his best, but without the stress and desperation that had driven him for so many years. Sophie had inherited his determination and attention to detail, but she'd learned to apply those traits with joy instead of anxiety. Very good, Chef Sophie, Bella said, appearing beside Jonathan and slipping her arm around his waist. Though I think you might want to supervise the measuring of the cocoa powder. Maria has enthusiastic measuring skills. Like someone else I know, Jonathan murmured, remembering his daughter's first attempt at measuring ingredients that memorable night. Hey, Bella protested with mock indignation, my measuring skills are perfectly calibrated. It's just that sometimes recipes need a little extra love. They were making another birthday cake this time for Maria, whose parents had brought her north for a week-long visit that had turned into an extended stay once she discovered the magic of learning to cook with her cousin and new aunt. The cake was a variation on the chocolate masterpiece that had started everything, but with decorations that reflected Maria's passion for horses and her determination to become a veterinarian who specialized in unicorns. Daddy, can you help us with the frosting? Sophie called over. Maria wants it to be purple but not too purple, and I'm not sure how much food coloring to use. That sounds like a job for the expert, Jonathan replied, nudging Bella forward. I'm just the business manager of this operation. No, you're not, Sophie corrected seriously. You're the daddy who makes sure everyone feels loved and safe so they can create beautiful things. That's the most important job of all. Jonathan felt his throat tighten with emotion, the way it still did whenever Sophie casually demonstrated the wisdom she'd gained from growing up in an environment where her thoughts and feelings were valued. She'd learned to see past titles and roles to understand what people actually contributed to the world around them. Besides, Bella added with a grin, someone needs to be the official taste tester. We can't serve Maria a birthday cake that hasn't been properly quality controlled. As they worked together, the four of them now, plus the inevitable appearance of staff members from their restaurants who'd somehow found excuses to stop by, Jonathan marveled at how natural this felt. The kitchen that had once been a sterile corporate space now hummed with the kind of energy that only came from people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Maria turned out to have inherited the family gift for baking, her small hands surprisingly steady as she helped pipe frosting roses around the edge of the cake. She peppered Bella with questions about everything from the science of leavening agents to whether it was possible to make a cake that looked like a unicorn, and Bella answered each query with the same patient attention she'd given Sophie that first night. "Can I tell you a secret?" Maria whispered to Jonathan when they found themselves working side by side to clean mixing bowls. "I love secrets," Jonathan replied solemnly. "I think Sophie is the luckiest kid in the world," Maria confided. "She gets to live with a daddy who hugs her every day and a mama who teaches her how to make magic in the kitchen." "Mama?" Jonathan glanced over at Bella, who was helping Sophie adjust the position of a particularly challenging frosting rose. "That's what I call her," Maria explained matter-of-factly. "She said I could call her whatever felt right, and Mama Bella felt right. Is that okay?" Jonathan looked at his wife, who'd caught enough of the conversation to be blushing and smiling simultaneously. They'd talked about children of their own, but the conversation had always been theoretical, something to consider for the future. But watching Bella with Maria, seeing how naturally she'd stepped into a maternal role, Jonathan realized that future might be closer than they'd thought. "I think that's perfect," he told Maria. "And I think you're right about Sophie being lucky. But you know what? I think I'm the luckiest one of all." "Why?" Maria asked, pausing in her bowl washing to look up at him with curious eyes. "Because I got to marry the woman who taught my daughter that the most important ingredient in anything you make is love. And now I get to watch both of you learn that lesson too." As if to prove his point, Sophie appeared at his elbow with a spoon covered in chocolate frosting. "Taste test time, Daddy. But this is the extra special batch with Maria's secret ingredient." "What's Maria's secret ingredient?" Jonathan asked, accepting the spoon. "Happiness," Maria announced proudly. "Bella said every cook has their own secret ingredient, and mine is happiness because I like making people smile." Jonathan tasted the frosting, which was indeed perfect, rich and smooth with just the right balance of sweetness and chocolate depth. But more than that, it tasted like joy and laughter and the kind of family moments that would become treasured memories. "It's incredible," he pronounced seriously. "I think Maria might be a natural pastry chef." "Can I work in your restaurants when I grow up?" Maria asked eagerly. "I could make cakes that make people happy, and maybe I could be a unicorn veterinarian on weekends." "I think that sounds like an excellent career plan," Bella replied, appearing with the finished cake balanced carefully on a glass pedestal. "Though you might want to check with your parents first." The cake was a masterpiece, 3 layers of chocolate perfection covered in pale purple frosting, decorated with roses and delicate piped unicorns that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Maria had insisted on writing, "Happy Birthday to Me," across the top in silver script, and somehow the uneven letters made it even more perfect. "It's beautiful," Maria breathed, clapping her flour-covered hands together. "Can we light the candles now?" As they gathered around the cake, singing Happy Birthday, while Maria's face glowed in the candlelight, Jonathan found himself thinking about how much had changed since that first desperate search through empty hallways. He'd been looking for his daughter, but he'd found so much more: a new definition of success, a partner who shared his values, and a family that had grown beyond his wildest dreams. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Bella encouraged Maria as the song ended. Maria closed her eyes tightly, her face scrunched up with concentration. When she opened them and blew out the candles in one breath, she announced, "I wish that every kid could have a family like this one, where people make cakes together and nobody is too busy to listen to stories about unicorns." Jonathan exchanged a look with Bella over Maria's head, both of them thinking the same thing. Their restaurants were successful, their marriage was happy, and their family was growing in ways they'd never expected. But maybe there was room for something more, a way to extend the magic they'd found to other children who needed patient adults and opportunities to learn that they were capable of creating beautiful things. "That's a wonderful wish," Bella said softly. And who knows? Maybe someday we'll figure out how to help make it come true. Could we? Sophie asked, her eyes bright with possibility. Could we teach other kids how to bake? Maybe kids whose families don't have time to cook with them. Or kids who don't have families to cook with at all, Maria added with the kind of intuitive compassion that reminded Jonathan why he'd fallen in love with the idea of children in the first place. Jonathan looked around the kitchen at his wife, his daughter, and the little girl who'd somehow become part of their family in the space of a week. This room had been the site of panic and crisis, but it had been transformed into a place of learning and love and possibility. You know what? He said, pulling all three of them into a group hug. I think that sounds like the most important restaurant we could ever open. As they cut the cake and shared stories and made plans for teaching the world that love really was the most important ingredient in everything worthwhile, Jonathan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with a father's worst nightmare, a missing child, and evolved into his greatest dream, a family built on understanding, respect, and the kind of unconditional love that made everything else possible. Sometimes the most beautiful stories began with what looked like disasters. Sometimes the people who appeared to complicate your life were actually the ones meant to complete it. And sometimes a simple act of kindness to a lost little girl in a quiet kitchen could transform not just one family, but potentially countless others who were still searching for their own version of home. The secret ingredient had been there all along, waiting to be discovered by hearts brave enough to remain open to unexpected possibilities. And as Bella cut perfect slices of Maria's birthday cake while Sophie told elaborate stories about unicorn veterinary medicine, Jonathan knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come.